What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Nights at the Round Table. Hey, today we're going to talk about something that I believe we all have, which is a bias. Look, man, it was a hard day in my life when I had to realize or recognize or even admit to myself that I'm biased on a lot of things because it altered the way I treated people and approached situations. Now, this all came to head when my wife was triggered by something on social media. Find out what it is. Tune in because we're going to be calling ourselves out. That's the way to do it, you know? We ain't calling nobody else out. We're going to call ourselves out on all the biases that we have and then figure out how we can live without them, how we can transform them into something that becomes a balanced life. Thank you so much for checking us out. We hope you enjoy it. Here's Nights at the Round Table. And welcome to another episode of Nights at the Round Table. Tis your boy, MANWELL'S. Be Real's in-house today.
Yeah, in the building. Let's go.
We ain't afraid anymore.
We back.
We back. Hey, I don't know how you guys are doing, but it's been a while since we've gotten together and been able to actually do something in the same spot. So it feels good. It does feel good. This is our son. I got my queen right here to the left and our son Bonzo, who just wants to be a part of everything. If you can't see him because you're not watching on YouTube, speaking of which, if you are on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. It means the world. Don't lick my stuff, son. I appreciate you. Today, we're talking about something that came up in an interesting conversation between my wife and I. And I'm sure by the title of this video, some of you are probably like defensive from the jump. And I want to reiterate, or not even reiterate, I want to put you at ease. This is not an attack the flag, attack America, we hate America podcast. This is not going to be one of those things. It's actually going to be one of these things where we call ourselves out on the bias that we have when we see certain symbols. So for a lot of you guys, the American flag means something very specific. For most of us, we were taught it's liberty, it's freedom, it's justice. It's all these beautiful things that our country has stood on, principles and beliefs and all these morals that we have been known for on a global sense. But if you wanted to be honest, a lot of Americans don't see the flag in the same way. And I think that was the thing that we got woken up to when my queen here got a message from her brother. Tell the people what happened.
Well, so I'm in a text thread, Instagram thread with my family, as most people have. You have your friend groups and your text threads and whatever. So I have one with my family. And a friend of mine posted something on her stories about coronavirus numbers being inflated and that doctors were getting paid to say somebody died of coronavirus instead of they just had a heart attack or whatever it was. And so she was posting some of this on her stories and I was like, that's interesting. And so I sent it to my Instagram thread with my family. And my brother responded back with a screenshot of this girl's Instagram profile. And in her profile, it says, I love Jesus and an American flag. And immediately he says, nope, I don't trust her. And I was like, why? That's my friend. And he was like, well, be careful. and he's like, I don't trust anybody with an American flag in their bio. And now keep in mind, my brother...
An American flag and I love Jesus flag.
Yeah, together. Yeah. The hand in hand, I love Jesus and American flag. Yeah. And this is coming from not someone who doesn't like America or support the troops. He's actually in a relationship with an active military soldier. And so that's definitely not the case. It triggered something else. And as I started to think about it, I knew exactly what my brother was talking about because I do that too. When I get a comment from someone on Instagram that either I don't agree with or I don't like, or somebody's starting a debate on my page and I click on their profile to see who they are. If they have an American flag in their profile, to me, that doesn't signify I am proud to be an American and freedom and home of the brave. That doesn't signify that to me. To me, it signifies I voted for Donald Trump. That's it. That's what triggers in me. And then if I see the I love Jesus and an American flag, then I'm like, oh, these people are ultra conservative. And that's why they don't agree with whatever I just said or something. So that was a bias that I saw in my brother that I was like, hey, that's like being biased. And I go, oh, wait, I do the same thing. So it was something that I noticed that the American flag can trigger me. If I see an American flag hanging in front of the post office, the grocery store, anything like that, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. But the second I see it in somebody's social media profile, to me, it says a completely different message. And that is a bias that I have. And I don't want to have that bias because that's not fair.
Right.
But it's something I recognize in me.
I heard a interview the other day where she was talking about the American flag and how she loves to be patriotic, but there's a big difference between patriotism and nationalism. And this is what she said, when you start putting an object over the people that it's supposed to serve or represent, then it no longer holds the same value that it once had, because that object was a sign of freedom and it was something that meant something, but it was reinforced by the people to which served under it. So she was telling the interviewer that she no longer feels the same way about the flag because it's something that hasn't, since she's been around, has been used more as a weapon against her than a symbol of freedom.
Wow.
Meaning a lot of the people that she's encountered with that flag has been like, go back home, we don't want you here type of thing. And this was her personal experience. This is not a generalization. This is what the lady was saying on the interview. And so to her, when she looks at that flag, she only sees her experiences, which was people that used that flag as a weapon against her for her to feel like she doesn't belong in this country. For me, I was raised in, I was an Army brat. So the flag is I'm so patriotic with the flag. My dad has had one outside of our house since day one. And he's served 2 tours in Vietnam. He's been 23 years in the Army. So he's like, and we're Army through and through, So growing up, it never was that for me. So I couldn't identify, but I also could understand, because for me, it was something that was a symbol of what Dad did. Like he went and fought for this country and for that flag. And so it meant something different to me. So I think for most of my life, I grew up thinking everybody sees this flag the same way, because we live on base. Yeah. Everyone is gung-ho Army. Right. There's no such thing as anti-patriotism. July 4ths are like lit, you know what I'm saying? And it's for one reason only, is because we're all armed forces. That's where we're at. So it was hard to me once I got out, and once we retired, we lived in Florida. And to say that I encountered a lot of people post Army that used that flag as a weapon, I saw what she meant. Because we were in a very racially divided town, and we used to say this back then. I don't call people hillbilly anymore, but it was very much like hillbillies that would come after us, and it would be like a fighting thing. And on all their trucks was the flag. That, and a lot of them had the Confederate flag, which is something in the South that's very, very apparent. Which I just read that the Marine Corps, they used to have the Confederate flag on some bases, and it just got taken away.
Yeah, just a couple days ago.
That's insane.
Sorry, Brandon, you were about to jump in. Just real quick on the Confederate flag. I remember one time I was in Memphis, Tennessee, some part of Tennessee. I was doing a show, and my opener was T.C. Cope, and he's a black guy. Mm-hmm. He's older than me. He's, seen more than I have and grew up in the South. And we were driving in our rental car from the airport to the venue, and we saw this truck drive by, this big old monster truck with a huge Confederate flag, and these guys just proud driving by right by us. And I was so angry and hurt And I remember I looked to my friend sitting next to me and I'm like, I'm sorry. Like, that's awful. And he's like, I'm used to it. I grew up in the South. And I'm like, that I don't understand. And I remember that obviously triggered me back then, but that's what the Confederate flag did. And the Confederate flag represents a lot of things to different people, but it clearly represents slavery and the Civil War and all of that. And it sucks that we're in 2020 and we're just now saying, hey, we probably shouldn't have this flag up.
Yeah, we should rethink this. Yeah, a similar incident happened to me. This is probably about 10 years ago. We were in Huntsville, Alabama, which we have some great friends there.
Yeah.
And we were going to head down to Destin. And so it was about I want to say 6.5 hours, 7-hour drive from Huntsville. So you're going through Alabama. So I got my dad driving, mom in passenger seat, me and my sister were in the back. And I remember at one point on our little road trip, we get lost. So my dad pulls off on some side road and we're just trying to find directions. GPS is not working, no cell service. And we come to what looks like a shed, like this raggedy ass house. And it has a huge Confederate flag on the front. And immediately we were like, all right, let's slowly get out of here. And I remember that feeling, like my heart was racing fast. And it was just like, immediately I jumped to the conclusion. Again, never got out of the car, never talked to these people. It could have been a completely different story. But my first impression, my first thought was, oh no, these people won't like us. We can't trust them. We might actually be in somewhat of danger here. So we get out, we get to where we're going to. So the Confederate flag obviously triggers me in a much more bigger way than the American flag. Because to me, to the American flag, I think growing up, living in the suburbs, I mean, when I'm learning U.S. history, it's mostly white history. Rarely do I remember. I mean, of course, you're going to talk about MLK, right?
Sure.
But besides that, I don't really remember learning much black history growing up. So to me, the U.S. flag was always associated with specifically white males.
Right.
And so I think for me, there was this subconscious part of me as a young kid growing up in elementary school and through middle school that I don't think I felt the emotional connection to the flag.
Right.
You know, my family wasn't super patriotic. I mean, my grandfather served in the Navy, but ended up getting murdered by racist cops.
Wow.
So again, that's a whole nother story. But to me, there was never that emotional connection.
But
that people
just a
feel.
quick interjection: racist cops, and if you're listening, that's not an opinion.
Yeah.
It was proven, awarded by the courts.
Yeah.
Legitimately, these people got in trouble because they were found out to be racist. So
Yeah,
I just wanted to make sure that
these two officers had a history in the KKK.
right.
So they're legitimately racist cops.
Right.
You know. And so I think though in recent years that what I've felt in previous years that that disconnect emotionally to the flag has now turned into what Andrew was kind of talking about earlier. I get triggered. I immediately just start to assume things about you, which again, that's wrong on my part because the same thing that we're asking a lot of people to do, I got to be willing to do that too. There's parts of me that needs to change in the midst of all these conversations going on. So for me, I'm just I'm going to assume you're very conservative in your beliefs. I'm going to assume that you probably believe some conspiracy of some sort, especially on Facebook,
Right.
You know, and I'm going to assume that, I'm just going to assume that you don't get it, you know, which is I'm trying to find the right words, and I know
Which we know. Here's the funny thing: we are, for those of you who are listening right now, and I already know there's going to be messages of people who are forcing a generalization. And this is not a generalization. This is each person talking about their own thing, their own experience with it. But here's what I understand about it. And here's the point of us three very different images of the flag. And here's the point of it. If you don't want to accept that there could be a different experience that then forms a different belief system of something like the flag, then I don't know if you really want to understand or even have a conversation or be on the, I don't think you'll ever want to understand what someone else feels or what they go through and truly find like common ground. Because I feel that there's people that just believe this is what it is, and if you don't believe it, you're not patriotic. As opposed to saying, this is what it is, but I have to admit that other people have had different experiences with this quote unquote symbol that for me is all these good and fuzzy feelings. And for them, it was literally a weapon. And if you're not willing to at least entertain the fact that this could be true, then I think it does lean more towards nationalism than it does patriotism. And because I just feel, look, I was one of those people and I have to be honest, like I just didn't, and it sucks to admit this, but I didn't like do a lot of research like about this specific thing. I didn't do a lot of research about race. I didn't do a lot of research about U.S. history because like Brandon said, you know, we were taught a thing, and this is what I remember about U.S. history or just history in general. There was this guy, Christopher Columbus, who discovered a country that coincidentally people were already on. And he was friendly to them. And the pilgrims came through. The pilgrims came through. This is what we were taught. The pilgrims came through. Thanksgiving. So it was taught, and right. I don't know if anyone else felt this way. It was taught that the Indians were grateful that the pilgrims were here.
Native Americans.
Because the Native Americans, they were appreciative of the technology, learning how to plant crops or whatever. This is what I'm taught. And they had a good time together, everyone eating and drinking, and this was great. Then there was this thing called
corn.
And corn, yes, corn.
There's always corn in the pictures.
Then there was this thing called slavery that we kind of brush past it pretty quickly, and we get on to the Civil War, which I guess it was painted as good guys, bad guys. But really, both sides had slaves. We didn't really dive into that too much. It was just like the North, was fighting for this. The South was fighting for this, even though both people had slaves. And then the North won. And then everybody was free, technically. But then we needed the Civil Rights Movement to happen. And slavery being abolished in 1865, I believe. And then the Civil Rights Movement had to happen. But that's about as much as we really touch on like what actually happened in the viewpoint of a person of color. I never thought deeper than that. It was always just like, we'll just do hop, skip, and jump through history. But then when I really thought about it, and I was like listening to another, and this was a white person talking, right? So this is not like I'm only watching, black media. It's not that. Like I love having all sides. And I remember I was watching on YouTube. I need to find it. And this white person was talking about the wealth built in America. And this is something I never thought of, which is really stupid of me to not even think this far deep. But everything that was built in America was built off of the back of people of color. And because there wasn't like other people working the cotton fields. Right. And back then cotton was massive, oil, massive, building, transportation, massive, but all these things were done by slaves. So there's a lot that I didn't actually care to research, and especially about the flag in the same way. And so I look back on the flag, which I didn't even know this, guys, and this is just me proving the ignorance. The amount of revisions that our flag has gone through is kind of insane. From freaking 1775 all the way to when the final 50th star was added in 1960 was when the 50th star was added.
Wow.
There was like at least 20 different revisions to the flag. So obviously these people weren't as tight with the flag.
Yeah.
They weren't like, don't touch it, don't whatever, because they would change as a state got added, or as something was realized, it was changed. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
This flag was flown in the back. Okay, so like in 1820 to 30, Bennington flag. According to some accounts, this flag was flown at the Battle of Bennington. It is sometimes called the Fillmore flag. The story goes that the that Nathaniel Fillmore took this flag home from the battlefield, and the flag was passed down through generations of Fillmores, including Millard, and today it can be seen at Vermont's Bennington Museum. Most experts doubt this story and date the flag to about 1820 or 1830. So the timing is what they doubt. But it was a completely different flag. And so what I'm realizing is, man, I think as they were continuing to grow the country, they cared less about the specificity of the flag and more so about what it represented.
Yeah.
It was more about what it represented, which is why they kept adding stars, because they kept saying, hey, we're unifying. Now there's 50 of us. Now there's 45, there's whatever. So I feel like it was always something more, which makes me think that in a time right now where we can be so angry and this flag can be so polarizing, I think like what they did in history, the first thing we need to do is, what about the people? Mm-hmm. And then from there, move on to the patriotism of the flag. But I feel like the people have to come first. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. What you were saying earlier about kind of like we brush over history, like we skip to the parts, and it sounds a lot nicer than it really is. Maddie and I, during this time, we went through a Marvel movie marathon. Mm-hmm. And it was like the coolest thing ever because we got to go back and we went in chronological order, you know? And one of my favorite ones is that latest Thor, the Ragnarok. Mm-hmm. So he has this image of what his father and how his father acquired Asgard, okay? And hopefully you've seen it at this point. If not, I'm just going to ruin this movie for you. And it's all like gold and it's shiny and it's ornate, like it's beautiful. And right when his father is like dying, his sister comes back, Hela, and she's like the goddess of like death, I think. So she's like super destructive and all this sorts of stuff. So she comes to Thor and she goes, "You don't even know your own history, do you?" And he's like, "What do you mean? Father, he made peace with all these other realms or whatever." And she goes, "No, like all this gold that you're standing on today, the gold of this whole temple and everything is all from other realms that we've conquered." And she shoots up the spear to like the ceiling, and it's this like beautiful, peaceful mural. And then that mural breaks and you see like all this like bloodshed. So you see these violent images of Odin and Hela going and destroying these other countries. Wow. It's interesting because I feel like that picture has really kind of put into context these last, I would say like 8 to 10 years of my life. And the study and the research that I've now done and have to like actually go back and look at these like amazing, beautiful Black leaders throughout history. And to me, I'm like, oh, this is like, that's that reckoning, in a way, because you realize, oh, this gold, this wealth, what you were talking about, that was built on bloodshed of a brother,
Yeah.
And that's the crazy thing about all of that.
It's here's the thing, like, again, I reiterate this, that there has to be a point to where we can come to an acknowledgement that experiences matter. Like they truly, truly matter. Yeah. And what makes us biased are those experiences, And that's the thing that we're talking about today. I used to have a bias. Well, I had multiple bias. A lot of it came from, again, I don't think my childhood was horrible. But when I was in Germany, I was scared of white people. Here's why. A, because I was in Germany and I was a little colored boy. B, because I used to get chased by gypsies. So it was like legit gypsies. So and there were these white kids that would literally just chase me to try to beat me up. And so from then, I had like a healthy fear of white people. Then when I get to Florida, I encounter the same thing. And it's like, oh my God, I need to stick, to my own kind. And so I had this bias thing with white people I was scared of. And then I didn't do too well with authority. It's another thing. Anyone who was in authority over me, I just saw them as wanting to tear me down, break me down. And so I had zero respect for anyone. Cops, I had no respect for cops. I had no respect for principals, teachers, nothing. Because in my mind, they just wanted to push me down, to lessen me. And then I needed to be afraid of the white people because they were going to hunt me and kill me. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's what I was afraid of. And it was all this this bias. And then to be honest, when I step back out of it and I look at it, I'm like, man, there's a lot more white people that were nice to me than were not. And so I like had to stop what I was thinking and the way that I was thinking, because I feel like I was going down a path that was like, I know a lot of us, it's easy to go down, which is let these things force you into assuming that everybody is a certain way.
Yeah.
And the danger of that is, and this is something that, you know, me and my wife have been talking about a lot, is just that I feel it's so easy to ignore the golden rule. It's the most fundamental thing ever. Do unto others as you would like to be done unto you. It's so fundamental and so easy, but I feel like it's the most widely ignored concept ever, because most people treat other people in a way that they would hate it if they were treated. And so when I look at this, when I was talking to Ange, and I was like, man, babe, it's not good to really like have those kind of assumptions. Like if you see somebody that says I love Jesus or that has a flag, like we need to break that. It doesn't matter how much everyone would like to say, oh, but that's true, or but yeah, that's the commonality of it. It doesn't matter, because what we're doing at that point is putting on someone else that we're begging people to not put on us. So if I'm a person of color and I'm, you know, Latino descent, you know, there's a lot of stereotypes that we have, a lot that come with us. And I don't expect people to put them on me. But I for damn sure then need to be cognizant and mindful that I'm not doing it to somebody else, because it's just not fair. No matter how much we feel it is deserving of a certain person. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I feel like, again, I could speak on this because I've been a part of the church my whole life. I feel like, especially in the church, at least the environments that I've been in, we do such a good job at using otherism. We are always building walls, and we are always putting whatever that group is on the other side. You know, specifically, I'd say of the LGBTQ.
Sure.
In more modern years, there's always this wall, and we put them on the other side. And I see that even a little bit with now, like there's some more conservative people, I'd say, struggle to get behind Black Lives Matter. Mm-hmm. And it's this whole thing now, whether they're getting caught up in the rhetoric or the verbiage or the values of Black Lives Matter, you're kind of missing the point in some ways, you know? But it's so easy to paint them as the other, you know, that you now have completely disconnected yourself from them. But the truth is you're connected regardless.
Yeah.
You know, and I think a lot of times we forget that. So in ways that I make assumptions based off my bias, I'm doing the same exact thing. I am putting me versus that person. It is us versus them.
Yeah.
When in reality, it's just us.
Exactly.
And that's the same problem on both sides.
I used to do the same thing when it came to rap. When I first got saved and I started rapping, I would notice other quote unquote Christian rappers, like not making fun of, but almost like downplaying other rappers. They weren't Christian. They would like diss them because they were rapping about money, hoes, and clothes. You know, they were like, it'd be like, oh yeah, but they're whack because they're rapping about the world and da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, yeah, but bruh, that's where they live. Like they don't go to church. Why would you expect them to rap about what we rap about? It just doesn't make sense. But I saw that everybody that rapped outside of Christ was just whack because they were rapping about death. And I promised myself, I was like, I am never going to be one of those quote unquote Christian rappers that are like, yeah, you got a lot of money and you got a crazy life, but that don't matter because you ain't got Christ. You know? I'm like, I'm never going to be that guy because I'm not in any way. And the fact that I came from that life, you know what I'm saying? Like I used to be a little thug. I used to rap about money, hoes, and clothes. Why? Because that's all I know. That's all I knew back then. So I only expect someone to reproduce out of them what their environment has taught them, where they were raised and taught them. Now it's up to me to decide whether I want to take the time to try to understand them. Because here's what this means. Here's what it means if you really want to grow and find a common place with you and your brother. Which, again, if you are a believer and you call yourself a believer, there's no way you can hold I don't see how you can be an effective, Let me see how I word this. It is really tough to be an effective follower of Christ when you put politics over
Souls.
over relationship, over God. When we start being way more red and blue
Yeah.
over the blood of Christ red, then I don't know how. I don't think that we would be able to have a good conversation. I will still have a conversation with anybody like that, but I don't know if it'll turn out good because we're not starting from the same place. We're not starting from a place of acknowledgement that what is the most important thing? Is it red and blue? Is it this flag? Or is it people? Because when Christ came, like this was not an issue for him. He didn't have political distress for him. It was around him, but he never made decisions based on it. He only dealt with the love of people, which really makes hardcore conservatism and liberal. Like if you're a believer, it really makes you have to think. Because I really feel like most of us are doing politics over Jesus.
Oh, absolutely.
Like for sure. The amount of anger. I remember when I voted for Obama first time around, the amount of my friends that were like, I question your Christianity.
Yeah.
And they were not playing. It wasn't a joke. They literally questioned my Christianity. And we do it now. If you voted for Trump, then we got to question you. So the danger in that is I wouldn't want somebody to do that to me. Yeah. I wouldn't want somebody to be like, oh, I voted for Obama or I voted for Trump. And then all of a sudden you're going to be like, whatever, which is why I don't do it to other people. Because I can't reduce you to the person that you voted for. Because there's a myriad of reasons of why you think what you think, why you believe what you believe, why you voted which way you voted. I have to first approach you as a woman or man of God, a daughter or a son. And I have to treat you how that tells me to treat you first before I start employing my freaking Republican or Democrat bullets.
Yeah.
And that's just how I've always lived my life, which is probably why I seem more non-political than anything. I don't really hit on politics because I've always seen people through God before any kind of party line.
And I think too, in a lot of ways, well, you talked a little bit about this earlier of when it crosses that line into nationalism, where all of a sudden your country and its values supersede your allegiance to Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. That's where it becomes very problematic. Mm-hmm. Because now all of a sudden what you were saying, it's red or blue, but really it's like you've now expected your help and your rescue to come from the person that's sitting in the White House. Rather than Jesus empowering the church of Jesus to say, go out and be the change, go out and change the culture. Because the truth is, at the end of the day, as believers, we were always called to be countercultural, that we were called to bring heaven down on earth. And so that set of values and the metrics for those values are completely different than a political agenda.
Right.
So whether you're leaning on the left or the right, I mean, at the end of the day, hey, do your research and you check with the Spirit of God of what feels right in you.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I'm called to something higher and I'm called to something deeper.
Yeah.
And even too, man, I'm guilty of this. There's sometimes I get heated because as my theology has changed over the years, how I see different policies and political parties has changed as well. Mm-hmm. And that's a whole nother conversation. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, like Jesus Christ is Lord of my life. And that supersedes, it doesn't matter whatever political party I feel like more connected to.
Yeah.
And so again, that's the biggest thing right now, because I think that political spirit is so rampant right now. And especially in the church, like there's so much division in the church right now over this thing. And it's sad because I think like in a lot of ways, this is one of the enemy's tactics to get us distracted.
Yeah.
Like we're missing out on what we're actually called to do. And because we're in this battle with ourselves, there's God. Okay, I was just talking to a friend about this the other day. Like God is going to accomplish what he wants to accomplish in the earth. Mm-hmm. Now, whether the church steps up and does that doesn't matter. Ideally, that's the vehicle for change. Again, the power of the church in culture is called to be that agent of change. But if they don't step up and take their place, God will raise somebody else up. And so I was having this conversation with a friend the other day, and kind of going back to Black Lives Matter real quick. He was calling out, I don't trust them. I can't stand behind it because of some of their values. And I just said, bro, you don't get it. Because a church has failed to do the justice work, God raised up Black Lives Matter. And whether you agree with that agenda or not, I like the way they're doing it better than the way that you aren't doing it. And I think that's the Otis on the church is like, how dare we critique some of these people who are stepping up and doing the work, and you ain't doing nothing.
Right.
And so we
That's
can't
powerful.
critique the other. Like, we always have to hold up that mirror. And I remember there was this one of my favorite songs ever, because it's such I love the image of it, is John Foreman from Switchfoot. And one of his solo projects, one of the titles of the song is "A Mirror is Harder to Hold." And I think that's so true.
Yeah.
The mirror is always harder to hold, and it's so much easier to find all the flaws in our other.
For sure. There's this one quote I saw that said, try hard to not offend. Try even harder to not be offended. And it hit me so hard because I'm like, I know, well, most people who got super offended probably turned this podcast off like about 30 minutes ago. Those of you who are still sticking through because you're genuinely wanting to learn or hear other perspectives and maybe force yourself to be challenged, to think, to really put yourself in somebody else's shoes, are sticking along for the ride. And some people are probably listening and still like very angry. And if you are very angry, I would love to check that anger, because that anger is not coming from a place of peace towards your brethren or peace towards whatever, to somebody else's situation. It's coming from a bias. It's coming from something that a belief or an ideology that has been put up that is more important than hearing somebody else and their story. And this is not a right or wrong issue. Like, nothing that we're saying is a right or wrong issue. We don't believe that we know exactly what's supposed to happen and what's right and what's wrong or whatever. We're able to speak from our own experience and draw some type of thought out of that. Like I said, I was ignorant for a long time. I never looked into any of this. My world was so small. I basically studied a lot about the Bible, but about social things or history, even my own history, never studied it, which we could talk about that more in the next podcast. But I am now understanding that a lot of the disagreements that I had with people was because I refused to see their side of anything. It doesn't matter if I agreed or not. I just refused to see their side because I didn't agree. But that also left me completely one-dimensional. Which is why now when I research both sides. I had a girl hit me up on Instagram and was like, hey, do you ever listen to Candace Owens? And, she lifted off a bunch of, superheroes from the conservative side. And because she was like, it seems that you lean one way. I was like, you obviously have not heard all these podcasts, because there's no way in hell you think I lean just one way. I'm kind of the most non-leaning person. I don't do politics that well. But I can tell that she was looking at me through a bias. And then my question to her was, well, have you done research on this side of things? And she was like, no. And I was like, so you're accusing me of doing something that you yourself are not doing, but she can only see her side. She can only see the voices, and she only wants to hear the voices that she wants to hear that sound like what she believes in. I listen to both sides. I listen from all the way to the right, all the way to the left. And I think that you can learn something from anyone. I listen to Malcolm X, and at the same time, I listen to Martin Luther King, who, by the way, Malcolm X was not a fan of Martin Luther King. He straight called Martin Luther King Uncle Tom and believed that the way Martin Luther King was going about it was wrong, wasn't going to work, even though Martin Luther King is the one that was able to push the civil rights movement a long way. Like, Malcolm did not agree with his tactics. They thought it should happen differently. Malcolm was a little bit more, they asked him, you consider yourself militant? And he's like, I consider myself Malcolm. But in a way, he's like, yeah, Like I don't put up with nothing. I'm about getting it done, and there is no forgiveness. We're not gonna forget. We're not gonna forget what the white people have done. That's not how we roll. And I was like, man, this dude Malcolm did not want to. He didn't even want to entertain Martin Luther King's ideas of thinking. And when I see it on screen like that, I'm like, man, Lord, never let me be that guy. Like I have to be able to listen. And it's something that we push on this podcast so much. It's open. Everyone's invited to the table. Everyone's invited to the table. So when I get crazy comments, sometimes there've been a couple times where I'm like, oh, I get really angry. But I have to like remember, hey, I told everybody they're welcome to the table. Which means whether you agree with us or not. And 9 times out of 10, I'll get so many messages where like, I love your podcast. There's some stuff I agree with. There's some stuff I don't. And I always say, thank you so much. Can you please tell me what it is that you don't agree with? Because I'd love to learn. Tell me. And that's what I asked this girl who wrote me. She's like, have you ever thought about this or this? Have you ever seen these people? Because blah, 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 blah. And I won't get into everything that we talked about because that's more for another podcast. But the interesting thing is that I was willing to hear her out and she was willing to hear me out. And I thought this was so dope on the things that she disagreed with and on the things that I was like, oh no, this is what it is. And she was very grateful that I actually had a conversation. And I think that that's what we really want to get at is that there has to be the room to have a conversation without anger being the loudest voice.
Yeah.
Because
Absolutely.
that's what I hear the most is like, you cannot talk about things. You always get, we always have Willie Matt on the show. We've had him twice, William Matthews. And me and Willie Matt, we go at it so much every time he's at my house. We go in because we stand on opposite sides of a lot of things. But I love hearing from him because when I finish talking to William, I go and I research everything that he tells me to. Even if I already think I know it, I will go back and research because I am willing to be wrong. I am willing to be wrong. I don't need to be right. And it's prideful for me to think that everything that I believe right now is what I'm going to believe in a year. It's so prideful when I look back. And if you're listening, look back in your life. Please tell me that all of the things you believed when you were 23 is what you believe now at 35.
Yeah.
You don't.
Yeah.
So why you hold on to your beliefs and to not even beliefs, your ideologies? Because I don't want you to get it different.
Right.
I know some of you super Christians are going to be like, but I'm never going to stop believing that Jesus is Lord. I'm not saying that. I'm saying your ideologies, the things that you have built up in your life that have now become religion to you, that are not based on Jesus. They're based on what you think is right and wrong. And you will die holding on to that. But the reason I see most people that die and they end up stuck thinking the same thing they did back then was because none of them decide you don't want to learn. It's not an issue of you can't, because information is out there. You just don't want to learn. And that you have to be real with yourself. I do not want to hear this person's story. I don't think they're going to say anything that's going to change my mind. I don't want to understand their plight. I don't want to step into their shoes. I want to believe what I want to believe because this makes me comfortable. Because the idea of changing scares the life out of me. So my biases have become my best friends. And that's just I don't ever want to live in that place, man.
Yeah. I think having these tough, uncomfortable conversations, the prerequisite, the door for stepping into these is humility. I think of this verse that's so commonly used, the 2 Chronicles 7:14. It says, if my people who are called by my name will what? Humble themselves and then pray. And it ultimately leads to God healing their land. But that's the thing. Like, I've found myself these days, I'm getting less into arguments and debates on social media and more into conversations. And again, my only hope is that they can hear what I'm saying and try to understand. But at the same time, too, as much as I want that for other people, I know when I'm approaching these conversations with people, the first thing I got to do is humble myself. And I'm sure we're going to talk about this at some point. But also the other thing is being open to change. Like, so many people right now on social media everywhere are demanding change. And I wonder how much of a percentage of those people are actually willing to change themselves. Because any change that happens on a large scale first changes on a small scale.
Yeah.
It's you, it's your family, it's your community. All of a sudden it's a region, it's a city, it's a state, you know? And then it continues to grow. But the thing for that is change within yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's a beautiful thing. I'm so reminded of the power of the gospel. And it has the power to completely change a person from the inside out. Like that's the greatest thing right now. And I think like right now the gospel is needed more than ever. And I'm seeing that. And I'm like sticking to that.
The proper gospel.
The proper gospel, not the prosperity, not the all this sorts of stuff, but the power of Jesus Christ becoming Lord, changing your whole set of values. You are now a part of something that you were called to a higher standard. You were called to be peacemakers. You know, you were called to be meek. You were called to help the oppressed. You were called to help the widows and the orphans, you know? You are called to stand for lives, you know? And so to me, man, that's humility. That's been a thing that's been kicking my butt recently. I've so had to humble myself because I have the tendency to believe what I believe is right, as we all do.
Yeah.
We're like, oh, I'm so right on this. I got this. Like my limited scope of perspective, this is the truth. And when you hold that sort of view of yourself, unfortunately, you're always looking down on people, which is sort of a major problem, you know? And so trying to look more eye to eye rather than looking down at people. And I'm going to miss it. I do miss it. And man, I just want to be more humble in these conversations.
Yeah.
That's good. I definitely need to work on being more humble as well, especially like with social media. And I have been very good at not engaging in debates right now. Little bits here and there, but for the most part, trying to hear people. And I had a couple guys in my thread telling me to research some, like you said, conservative heroes. And I was like, thank you for leaving me those names. I will look them up. And
Did you actually get to go look them up?
I've looked up a few of them. He gave me like 4 or 5 names. And one of them, of course, was Candace. And then one of the guys came back on my page a couple days later and was just like, just checking to see if you actually read or listened to any of her videos. And I was like, I did, actually. I watched a lot of her videos. It was hard to watch. And some of the stuff was really gross, but I did watch it. And I'm still reading and learning. Thanks for checking in.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing is like, I'm researching and learning, but it's not changing my mind. Like, I want to be open to learn because I want that side to be open to learn here, you know?
Do you feel that you approach those videos or those people with a clear non-bias, or are you already coming in with a filter? Because I believe that you can learn something from everyone. Everyone has something that you can learn. You may not agree with everything that somebody says, but these people aren't prominent because they're dumb.
Right.
You know, they're prominent because they're making points that a lot of people agree with. It's just which point are you going to listen to their platform or what it is that they're saying to be like, hey, well, why do people agree with this person? And then listen to them, like you said, do the research, but without that, here's the key, is that it's without the bias. If you come to that thing with the bias, you already are going to start, you're going to be triggered by the words that you don't want to hear, and it's going to mute out every point that is being made that is actually a decent point. So if you were to be honest when you watch these things, because I've seen Candace, she's not an idiot. She's very smart. She has a very strong opinion. How much of it is being done because now she is that token black conservative, like for the females? I don't know how much of that star power is now feeding into it, because you know, once you get famous for something, you got to keep that crap going. You can't turn soft now. You can't all of a sudden be whatever. You gotta ramp it up. And so I don't know how much of it is for that. It's for the optics. But she's not a unintelligent person. Some people, would call her dumb because of the things that she says, but really they call her dumb more so because they disagree with what she says. I can acknowledge that somebody is smart even if I disagree with them, because again, they're not there for no reason.
But honestly, I said that in the same way about Donald Trump. He's very smart. He got half the nation to believe him. And he'll like, say one thing, and then the next interview, they say, why'd you say that? He goes, I didn't say that. And you go, oh, wait, there's a video right here. You said it. And he goes, I didn't say that. And then half the country goes, yeah, he didn't say that.
Yeah.
How did he do that? He's very smart.
Yeah, well, you have to give it to, again, these people are prolific for a reason. And it may not always be for what you think is like smart or whatever, but I feel like if you allow yourself to, there's something you can learn from each of these people. There's something. You just have to approach it with the perception of, I'm going to learn something today. I used to do that in my old church. I used to go thinking, I'm not going to learn anything. This dude preaches like milk. He's constantly giving milk, and it's been milk since the day I got here 20 years ago. And then so in my mind, I was just like, I'm not going to get anything. So I stopped going. I stopped going because I'm like, I got to listen to somebody else to get any food. And then there was a little stint where I was back home, and I was like, you know what? This is a very bad way to look at this guy, because if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't even be where I'm at, because at some point I needed the milk. So I went back and I forced myself to go with a different perspective. And I was like, he is able to teach me something, because this dude has been serving the Lord for a long time. And there's something he's going to say that's going to change my life. And when I went back 100%, he started changing my life again. No, I didn't stay there, because again, like I felt like I moved on, and I did move on physically, but it took me to have to change my perspective, let go of the bias, and say, I can learn from you. I can learn from anyone. I don't want to hear just one side. If I hear just one side, I'm going to be a one-dimensional person. I need to be able to hear both. I need to be able to step in other people's shoes. It is essential for me, if I say I love God, to love his people. And that's everyone. That is everyone. I can't just count people out just because I don't agree with them. Because at some point, you really got to ask yourself, do you really want to follow this Jesus dude? Do you really want to follow this book? Because there's way too many people just picking and choosing just how they treat people. Mm-hmm. It's so easy. It's so easy to get online and to just say something negative, say some whatever. And this is how I always know whether I'm going to respond to somebody kindly or not, because the people that jump on the page, or who'll jump on this podcast and on the comment section and say something like, oh, well, and generalize something where nothing that has been said is being a generalization. We're literally repeating over and over. We are not generalizing. We are speaking off of personal experience. We're not saying everyone is this or everyone is that. I know that they're listening or they're commenting for their own gain. This isn't to have a conversation. When somebody hits me up and says, like they do in the DMs, because they're not trying to start a little media fire, and they're like, hey, I love what you're saying over here. I disagree with some stuff. And then I say, what do you disagree with? And then they tell me, and then I'm able to explain to them. 99% of the time, we find common ground. And some of them leave like, you know what? I understand what you're saying. I'm sorry for accusing you or jumping to conclusions. I kind of still don't agree, but I know where you're coming from now. And I'm like, that's all I ask. Thank you for writing me and doing it the right way. Thank you for showing me that you actually care, because you weren't like, oh, he's just this or he believes this. You were like, why do you believe this? Why'd you say this? This sounded like this. Why'd you say it? And I'm able to be like, This is why I said it. Have you heard about this? Have you done this kind of research? This is the research I did. How about you go do it and get back to me and let me know? And when they do, we find common ground. And that, to me, forms a bond and a communication level that is like something that's missing.
One of the things in understanding when you're having these conversations with people is what Manny was just saying, is trying to understand their why. Mm-hmm. Like, we all have a lens through which we look through. So sometimes it doesn't matter what facts that you give, unfortunately, because to me, that makes sense. Like, if I'm going to present to you a fact that is based in what has happened in reality, that should be enough for you. Like that should trump a lot of things. But I got into a conversation with a friend the other day, and he had posted on a story about this whole defund the police, and he was just like, this is asinine. We're going to have just like everyone just running these streets, like doing thug work, you know? Which, no. But so we're going back and forth, and he is not getting what I'm saying, you know? So I'm saying, hey, it's not abolishing the entire police.
Yeah.
Maybe that is an extreme in some cases. But I was talking about the way that this money can be divested from this and invested in other social programs that would help marginalized communities.
Well, because what they think is, so for people who are listening, most people think when they see defund the police, they think it's saying take all the money away from the police so that there be no more police.
Yeah.
It's not what defund the police is saying. Defund the police is saying the amount of money that we spend on policing is typically in a city half or more than half of the city's budget.
Yeah.
So what they're saying is distribute the fund a little more equally. If schools are being underserved financially, then we should probably pull back on policing on so much and invest in schooling, especially in the underprivileged areas, which in turn can possibly lower crime because you got kids that are actually educating themselves and moving on to higher education. So that's the idea.
And a lot of these calls would be prevented if there were these things in place. So anyways, we're going back and forth. And at the end of the conversation, he's kind of like, okay, I hear you, but my brother-in-law is a cop. And I was like, oh, that's the lens you're looking through. So the connection for you, or sort of your bias, is, oh, this is pulling food from my brother-in-law, my sister's table. Which that's not
that, or I like my brother-in-law. He's a good dude.
Right. He's a good cop.
Cops are good.
Right. So
which a lot of cops are good.
Yeah. So to me, I understood this hour back and forth conversation all came down to this. This is the way that you're looking at this, which we all have those. So I think it's even important to you understanding your why, like understanding your bias. And I think it's a good question. How do you recognize your own bias?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I was asking that, but I could answer that too.
I mean, I feel like there's the only way to answer your or recognize your own bias is there has to be a sense of self-awareness. You have to be able, if you cannot come to the agreement in yourself that you could be wrong, then I don't think you'll ever see your bias. If you just think that you're right and the way you view things is right and all the way you have taken in life is right and the way you research is right, and you're never going to see your bias. You're only going to think that you are correct.
I didn't see my bias about the flag in the bio until I saw it in someone else. And when I saw my brother say that, I was like, hey, that's bias. Oh, I do that. Oh, I do that. So I didn't see it until I saw it in someone else. But
a sense of you had to be like, I'm wrong.
Yeah, but not until I saw it. Like I was getting ready to correct someone else, and I was like, oh, I do that.
So, but you were willing to at least say that you're wrong.
Yeah.
Most people can see that and still judge that other person and not even connect the fact that they do it. Because nothing in them wants to at least entertain the idea that they could be wrong, or the way they see things are wrong, or the way they're communicating is wrong. If you can't even put in your mind, hey, you know what? I could be wrong in a lot of things. I should probably stay open. Then you're not going to see your bias. It'll always be your strength. It'll just mean that you know exactly what you believe and you're standing on it.
Right.
And everyone else is like, bro, you biased as hell. And you just see it as like the strength of your character.
Yeah. For me, one of the ways that I'm recognizing my bias is understanding my trigger points. So like taking note when I get triggered, what is it about this point right now in time that is triggering me? And if I follow that back, again, it's hard work and it's sucky work. No one enjoys doing that. But at the same time too, I am very, very aware these days of the moments where I start to feel, ooh. And instead of trying to like point now the finger at what that thing is that's pissing me off, I'm now trying to take a moment to reflect and saying, what is it about this and what is it in me? And And that's starting to unveil in these areas that I'm biased.
Yeah. Dude, that's amazing. Look, if you're listening to this and you, hopefully you listened all the way through, the real OGs have, we challenge you, man. All of us have these things. And that was the whole point of this episode is it started with the flag, and the flag introduced us to the fact that we had biases and that other people can see and experience something that we may for ourselves feel is so cemented in our mind or in our thoughts or in our life as something so clear, almost to the point where we're like, you know, you hear this all the time. I don't understand why these people would be this way, or I don't understand how can they can think this way. The reason you don't understand is because A, you've never been in their shoes. B, you haven't experienced what they have. And C, you're not willing to have the conversation of letting all your guards down to let their grievances take root in your life. The second that you can do that, that's the second that you can start saying words like, oh, I empathize. Oh, I can see why they do this. I can see why they do this, because you gave yourself the opportunity to care. I think if you can take a step back and do what B said, see what it is that triggers you. In this conversation, you probably got triggered multiple times. Take note. Literally take note. Go back and see this is what triggered me. And then do a little work as to why do I feel this way? What is really making me angry about this? Because they've said multiple times, they're not generalizing. They're not saying that they're right. They're not assuming that everything that's coming out of their mouth is 100% right. They're only saying their story or what they have experienced. And we haven't said anyone else is wrong. So if that be the case, this is not right or wrong between us and you. If you are triggered, find out what is that trigger and then do some work. And then we can talk about it straight up. DM us. I answer all the DMs. And if you have something specific for B or and just say it and I'll forward it to them. And we can have a conversation about it. And I think it'll be amazing because I would love so much so that if we can all find common ground so that we can keep the conversation moving forward, which at the end of the day is the most important thing when it comes to these things that make our country so divided. It's about moving the conversation forward. And then hopefully at one point we can find ourselves on the same page so we can finish out the history of America in a beautiful way. You know what I'm saying? So
I have learned a lot in this episode, and I feel like thank you guys for your vulnerability about your biases. And I think right now I am in that place of just learning, like how you were saying, like things I should have learned a long time ago, but I didn't. And I'm just trying to be more active of listening and learning.
Mm-hmm. Be slow to speak, quick to listen. That's just a little Bible for you. If we want to follow that still. Anyways, thank you so much for listening. We love you guys and we appreciate you. Hey, we pray that you find a seat at the table, but if you don't, you are always welcome at ours. Cheers.